Huggamugga and the Sandman by Freya from Read It and Sleep. Hello, sweetheart. I hope you're nice and cozy and comfortable because I'm going to tell you a story. This is a story about a friend of mine whose name is Huggamugga. I know, that's a silly name, isn't it? But that's okay, because Huggamugga is a very silly crocodile. He has a green, scaly back, a soft, yellow belly, and a big, smiling grin. Although his grin is a bit wonky at the moment because he has a wobbly tooth. Huggamugga lives in a zoo with all sorts of animals. There's big creatures like elephants and tigers and giraffes, and small creatures like bats and meerkats and frogs. There's also a zookeeper called Holly who looks after them all. Our story actually starts when our hero isn't even awake. He's lying on his belly, sound asleep. It's night time, so most of the animals are sleeping. The leopards are asleep, high in the trees, their tails dangling lazily over the branches. The meerkats are sleeping too. They've piled themselves all up in a big, furry heap. The bats are hanging upside down, cozily wrapped up in their little leathery wings. The otters are all holding hands in a makeshift raft floating on the water, gently bobbing up and down, up and down. The elephants are snoring loudly. And the giraffes have curled up their long necks to rest them on their backs, and they are sleeping soundly too. In fact, all of the animals in the zoo are asleep, all except one. Poor Philip the armadillo is sat there yawning. He hasn't been able to get even so much as a wink of sleep. He lives next to the elephants, and they are very noisy, trumpeting to each other by day and snoring loudly at night. The other animals had all tried to help Philip go to sleep. The parrot had sung a lullaby she once heard, but that hadn't helped him go to sleep. The alpaca had donated some of her soft wool to plug his ears, but that hadn't helped him to go to sleep. The snake had made himself into a cradle so he could rock Philip back and forth, but that hadn't helped him to go to sleep either. Zookeeper Holly had even tried to read him a bedtime story, but he couldn't hear her over the elephant's snoring. So the next day, Huggamugga decided to go and talk to Elmer. Elmer was a wise old tortoise. He was over 157 years old. He was very slow at talking, so normally he just listened, and perhaps that's why he knows so much. "Do you know a way to help Philip go to sleep?" Huggamugga asked Elmer. "Well," said Elmer very slowly, you could ask the Sandman." "Who is the Sandman?" asked Huggamugga. "He's a little old man with kindly eyes, bandy legs, and a long, wispy beard," said Elmer. "He sounds nice, but how can he help?" asked the little crocodile. "Do you ever wake up with grit or sleep in your eyes?" asked Elmer, slower than ever. "Yes, sometimes," said Huggamugga. "Well, that is the Sandman," said Elmer the tortoise. "He sprinkles sleeping sand over you. That helps you to go to sleep." "He sounds like he could help," said Huggamugga. "Where can I find him?" "He lives in the land of Nod," said Elmer, extremely slowly. "How do I get there?" asked Huggamugga the crocodile. "The fairies would know. They go there all the time," said Elmer, laying his head on the soft pile of leaves under him. "But I don't know any fairies," said Huggamugga. But Elmer the old tortoise had already fallen asleep and was snoozing soundly. Then Huggamugga remembered that he did know of one fairy, and even though he had never met her himself, he knew that she had visited him many times. Of course, he was talking about the Tooth Fairy, and crocodiles have lots of teeth, so she'd been back and forth lots of times. Now, Tooth Fairies leave children like you money under their pillows, but crocodiles like Huggamugga don't need money, so they leave them garden gnomes instead. And crocodiles have a lot of teeth, so Huggamugga has a lot of garden gnomes. And so the little crocodile, absent-mindedly wiggling his wobbly tooth, headed off to find Holly the zookeeper. She was feeding the sloth, and he was lazily munching away on leaves as she handed them to him. Holly the zookeeper was quite short, with brown hair and big, expressive eyes, and, for some reason, she normally had an owl perched on top of her head. "I've got a plan to help Philip the armadillo go to sleep," Huggamugga told Holly. "Who?" said Ollie the owl from her perch atop Holly's head. "Philip the armadillo," repeated Huggamugga, still wiggling his wobbly tooth. "That's brilliant," said Holly. "How can I help?" "I need to get a message to the Sandman," said Huggamugga. "Who?" said Ollie the owl, looking down on him from atop Holly's head. "The Sandman. He helps people go to sleep," said Huggamugga. "Can you write a letter for me, Holly? Your handwriting is much nicer than mine." "Of course," said Holly, and then she looked up and said, "Ollie, would you mind?" "Not at all," said Ollie the owl, as she spread her great wings and launched herself into the air, slowly flapping a few times before soaring off in the direction of the office. A few moments later, she reappeared, gliding back towards them, circling round and round the group before gracefully landing once more on top of Holly's head. She had some paper and a pen clutched in one of her claws. "Thank you, Ollie," said Zookeeper Holly as she took the writing supplies from the owl. "Now, what do you want me to write?" asked Holly, settling herself down on a rock and resting the paper on her lap. "Okay," said Huggamugga. "Let's start with Dear Sandman," he said, still wiggling his tooth as Holly's pen scratched across the paper. "I am Huggamugga the crocodile, and I live in the zoo. My dear friend Philip the armadillo can't get any sleep because his house is next to the elephants, and they are very noisy. Please can you help him get to sleep by sprinkling your magical sleep sand over him? Yours faithfully, Huggamugga the crocodile." "That's perfect," said Holly, as she folded up the letter and placed it in an envelope marked Sandman. "I hope it works," she said, as she passed the envelope to Huggamugga. "Good luck," said Holly and Ollie in unison as they wandered off to feed the pandas. Huggamugga sat in his little lake, wiggling his tooth this way and that way, up and down, round and round, and eventually it came out. So he cleaned it up in the water and placed it with the letter under his pillow, and added a quick note to the Tooth Fairy, asking her very nicely to pass the letter on to the Sandman. He then got under the covers and started to get comfy. His bed was very soft and comfortable, and he knew that the Tooth Fairy would only come if he was truly asleep, not just pretending. But that was no trouble. It had been a very busy day, and he was rather tired, so he had a big stretch and yawn, and slowly drifted off to sleep. He slept wonderfully and had many beautiful dreams, and when he awoke, the tooth, the note, and the letter were all gone, and a little garden gnome was left in their place. Huggamugga smiled at the little gnome and headed over to where Philip the armadillo lived. Philip was yawning and stretching like he'd just woken up. Behind him, Huggamugga saw a little old man with kindly eyes, bandy legs, and a long, wispy beard smile and wave at him as he faded from view. Huggamugga waved back. "Who are you waving at?" Philip asked as he rubbed some gritty, sandy sleep out of his eyes. "A new friend," said Huggamugga. "How did you sleep?" "I slept wonderfully," said Philip, smiling. And Huggamugga smiled too, because he knew that his friend would no longer have any trouble getting to sleep ever again. The end. Good night, sweetheart.